Thank you, Claudia. So nice to be invited to do this with you. I'm not sure, I won't do too much more introducing, but I do just want to say that Julie Brook is, I think, of my experience, one of the most phenomenally bold and also delicate and courageous of artists. And Claudia used the word quickening, which I loved a lot. And if I want my imagination quickened, I know that I would turn to Julie Brook, who does everything with conviction. She brings to it manual skill as well as big creative vision, and those two things work together, and she brings to them both a great generosity of spirit. I've discovered no distinction between life and work with Julie Brook. The person who can light up a quarry, as you will see, is also the person who will light up a breakfast table or a Zoom screen with her energy and exhilaration. She did a drawing workshop for Arts of Place, and it's hard to get a load of professors absolutely wrapped on Zoom, but she did it. So I'm just really thrilled to be talking with her today, and I'm looking forward to seeing the images. Hello, Julie.
Hello, Alex. Thank you. That's a very, very generous introduction. And welcome, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be speaking with Alex at the beginning of your year. Thank you so much for inviting us both.
Thank
So,
you. And I'm sorry just to interrupt very quickly before I disappear. And that's just to remind everyone listening, so some of our new audiences in particular, that we really encourage conversation. And at the end of the discussion, there will be room for questions, time for questions. So please do feel free to leave questions or comments in the Q&A and chat boxes throughout, and we'll come back to those later. And now I will disappear and leave you to it. So thank you.
not at all.
Thanks, Claudia.
Thank you, Claudia. So I'm going to share my screen so that we can start straight away. And here we go. And I'm just going to expand that too. So why don't I start, Alex, and then because I know you'll very quickly have things to ask me or say about. But I thought I would begin with some. Just a handful of desert drawings. And what I mean by desert drawings is just drawings that were made in the desert in Libya. I was incredibly fortunate to go to Libya in 2008 and 2009. And I had never been in the desert before. I've been working for many years in the island of Mingale, which is right at the southern tip of the Hebrides, an uninhabited island. And I really needed a change. So I decided I had the opportunity to go to Libya. And when I got down to the south, where I was in the Jebel Akakus Mountains, the Tuareg guides I was traveling with, they showed me how different deposits of materials get laid down in the desert. So desert is incredibly rich and varied in its materials. And this was the very first drawing I made about one day in, having got over an incredible and very real fear of the sun rising. I didn't know how I would manage in the heat of the desert, but thanks to them, I learned about desert living. And this drawing is incredibly simple. I just literally scraped these 5 lines with the heel of my boot. And it's on quite a big scale, but to reveal this fantastic blue pigment beneath the surface of the sand. And what I first of all wanted to introduce with drawing is that it can be as viscerally responsive to your materials that you find to hand. What Alex and I want to explore is the way in which drawing is so many things. It is like breathing, and it is how you position yourself with your materials and your environment, and as well as how you put things down on paper. So that's why we're going to begin to explore with the desert drawings.
Strikes me there's an extra excellent reason to start with this, which is that some of our first drawings are on the beach, sand drawings, aren't they?
Yes.
And there's something so natural and spontaneous about it. And indeed, I know you think often about the fact that we draw before we speak, and yet you make this work of art revealing very complex materials in a very remote and difficult place. And it's like a whole arc from the most basic child sand drawing through to this beauty here.
Yes, I think you're absolutely right that the that very fundamental desire to mark make, whether you're just 9 months old, is it we draw before we speak. It's one of our earliest forms of expression,
Mm.
and I think if it's almost like tapping back into that spirit of playfulness and that very sort of genuine response when you are drawing. And I think that comes partly from responding, feeling very moved by a landscape, but it also can come from actually sustaining a rhythm in drawing, and so you get more and more involved. I'll just go to a next. So this piece is a little bit more formal. What happened was that the drawing evolved and evolved from the heel of my boot. I started using, very, very basic materials. In this case, just pulling a piece of string across actually quite a long stretch of the desert, and then covering up these blue volcanic plates with the sand where they got a bit thinner. And I was inspired by the natural lines that are occurring that you can see in the distance anyway on the horizon. But this was putting a very sharp line. And with this image, it's also got a lovely story, because it's the only time in the Saharan desert where I literally, it was like a sort of animated cloud came along, and I kid you not, literally just gave a rain burst for about 10 minutes, a very, very heavy rain, just after I finished the work and I was sweeping my footprints away. And it created this very beautiful stippled texture, which you might be able to pick up on the sand.
And is that partly the sheen that we can see on the
Yes,
volcanic plates as well?
yeah, because they really are volcanic, so then it's effectively lava, so it's very porous, and had a very dry, dusty look. And for this split second, it was covered in this beautiful sort of slightly metallic patina. And I've got an image 3 seconds later, and it's just gone. So this is really, really a moment in time. And what's interesting when you're drawing on the ground, Alex, is that you're also actually veering into sculptural concept, because you're dealing with the plane of the ground. And that's something that's very, very interesting to me, how drawing slides between sculptural concept and drawing for its own sake. I do regard these as drawings because they're essentially two-dimensional, but because you're dealing with a horizontal plane, your perspectives change according to how you move around the drawing.
Yes. I mean, how did you conceive when you're making that line, do
Mm.
you know where you want to photograph it?
No. It's very feeling your way, just like you would with a drawing. So I first of all just had a very strong impulse. This is what I wanted to do. And then I walked around the whole site. And so I could give you different views of it, as it were. This was just one of the most dynamic. And also it was when I caught it when it was just holding the water before it completely disappeared.
Mm.
And it leads to this drawing in paper, where I was using some of the desert clay that I had brought back with me. And I spoke just a momentary about the sort of sculptural concept, and that image inspired this working on paper, which is about 120 centimeters by 92 high, so not enormous. And I was using the pale yellow is taken from the desert, and then I was using a combination of desert clay and pastel for the grey form. But what's interesting about this drawing is that which was really exciting to discover, was that even though I was working with two very, very deliberately flat planes, actually the weight of the top of the grey plane has got this sort of this weight that's pressing and sliding almost down the paler triangle. And that's when a drawing, so could we, as Alex, we wanted to sort of talk about works on paper as well. It's when drawing is inspired by maybe a drawing that one has done outside, but then it becomes entirely its own language on paper. I could reference it, but equally it doesn't need to have any reference. It exists in its own terms.
And does having a piece of paper in front of you change your sense of the landscape around you? And do the four corners and the sharp edges of a piece of paper make you see different things in the landscape?
I think probably in an unsubconscious way, yes, most definitely, because when you're just looking with your eyes, for instance, if you're working from observation, when you're trying to draw on a piece of paper, you need to structure your composition. You need to find the edges of your composition, what you're seeing. And when you're walking through the landscape, you haven't got that definition. So that's a very straightforward way of sort of talking about that in terms of when you're working from observation. When I'm working, so a lot of these drawings come, as you know, a lot of drawings I develop after I've made work outside, then they will, I think they don't necessarily, well, they probably subconsciously influence how I might make something else outside, but I'm not sort of really conscious of it. But yes, I'm extremely, so for instance, here, the paper space above the drawing, as it were, is really important. That required a lot of playing around with for it to be to create the correct space for in which the drawing could work. If that makes sense?
Very much so. And we should say that this is the first in a whole series of works of paper you'll see where the material of the land is used as a kind of paint or pencil. So we'll connect the dots as we go along. Do you want to show the rest of the material images? Because we've got a sort of little section going on here of which we've called drawing with the materials of
yes. So this is you can see as a more physical drawing with working with stone and just clearing the bluey grey stone to one side. So it's a massive piece, to about 38 meters. But again, incredibly simple response to seeing these two different materials in that environment. And this is just a very simple drawing. But I don't know what it is about this drawing. So I wanted to create this sharp triangular form within this big plane. And all I'm doing is removing the top surface. So it's playing with the materials, but underneath, I mean, eventually that would have faded if I was on the move through Libya, so I didn't see it. But after a few days, that would have become more faint, I think, because but initially, when I just literally cleared this site, all I was doing was sweeping up the bluey grey stones, and it gives you this, from momentarily, this very, very sharp image, which in this case, I think actually emphasizes more the calligraphic mark of that's inherently in the desert, that just above the triangular form.
Yes.
And also it's sort of, because it's got these sharp edges, I think it creates this really real attention to the very subtle undulations within what seemingly seems a big plane of ground. And that to me is really exciting, if a drawing within the land can offset or enhance how we perceive something. So that's one aspect of working.
I find it so ethereal, that image, and yet I know that the work you were doing was lifting stones, was lifting debris, was very, very physical. And I think that's something which goes all through your work, is these extraordinary transitions from utter labour, manual physicality and engagement with material,
Yes.
to some sudden point where it seems to just be sort of transcendently glimmering, shimmering. And I wonder whether you know when that's going to happen. Does it happen the moment you stand back, or can you see it in your mind's eye as you start?
No, no. I mean, often, this image, just coming back to it, I was just following these. I was so excited being in the desert. It was like I couldn't stop working. And so I was just letting that, if you have that energy and you want to just keep working, my big maxim is don't think too much, just do it, because you can assess and think and reflect later. And I've got various images of this particular drawing which aren't they don't quite have this moment of relationship with the landscape. This one really does. And I don't think I knew that until I probably got home even. I knew that it was working within the whole plane of the desert, but I don't think I knew with quite such understanding, as it were. So that can come later. But I think the physical process, and this is something I would so encourage all of you, is that that's very liberating. It's very freeing. When you're making something, you're letting go of it. You're just getting involved with the materials. You're asking the materials to tell you what to do, and you're not overthinking something. And that's when the unexpected stuff starts happening, and that's really exciting. So I encourage you to experiment. I think Alex and I, we've spoken about it before, Alex, that notion of playfulness, of throwing things up in the air and trying something new. And if you're trying too hard, you're going to have a hard time drawing. But if you keep your
And yet the degree of deliberation and precision in your work is also to the fore. Perhaps we should have a few more images and
yes,
to move us from material into this idea of drawing with light.
yes. Well, this is a very good introduction to this piece. This is another desert piece of working with light and shadow, because actually that informs a great deal of my work. And of course that then takes us into the more sculptural element, which we're not going to go into in depth here. But this piece is very enigmatic, and it's created actually using the one material I did bring into the desert were polished steel plates. And this is using a polished steel plate. And I experiment in all sorts of ways with these plates. And quite a lot of the time they remain sort of prosaic. But there was something very magical about this image where the plate disappears and you have, such a wonderful simplicity, that you have light reflected on one side and shadow on another. And it gives, as you say, you can feel its transience, you can feel its ephemerality in this drawing, but it's precisely at the same time its sharpness is creating this lovely sort of contradiction between the two. So if we continue on with the subject of light, I'll bring you into this work, which we're still very much in the realm of drawing. I know we're also moving into sculptural work as well, but would you like to speak a little bit about this before I do, Alex?
Well, I think partly what I want to get at here is how talking about these works as drawings
Yes.
changes our sense of them, or shapes your sense of them, because we could equally not use the word drawing,
Yes.
and talk about the fall of light, talk about it as an installation.
Yes.
So I do want us to approach that, but so that we all know what we have on our screens.
Yes.
This is a work called Winter Wall, and Julie built a structure out of nice stone on the edge of a bay on North Harris, and it has a slender vertical gap opening in it through which light at a certain time, at a certain time of day and year, falls through the opening onto the floor inside the circular cairn shape, or room, kind of accommodating room. It falls first on the turf and then falls on the stone wall itself. And Julie, I think this took you by surprise when you saw how the light fell.
Yes, it very much did. I had created, so one of the reasons why I wanted to bring this into the discussion of drawing is that, for my mind, this is as much a drawing as the works we've just been seeing in the desert. In this case, it's drawing with light. But there was something very surprising about this work, because I had worked with certain works in Namibia where light was entering, and it has different characteristics according to the light, whether it's at the end of the day or the middle of the day or at the beginning of the day. And in this case, this is channeling the setting winter sun, midwinter sun, over maybe sort of a couple of months in midwinter. But what I was imagining was it would begin with this sort of pencil line of light, like I had experienced in Namibia. And so I was incredibly surprised and excited, because it was so different when I first witnessed it in a very, very cold winter of 2021. I was amazed at these wonderful dashes, like brush marks of luminosity on the moss floor, and which then gradually grew into a line. And it was incredibly exciting to share the surprise of it with Alex when I came home, because it was just so unexpected. And I think for it being fragmented, it felt so painterly somehow, which is why I so want to encourage you to think very laterally about drawing. I think it encompasses so much about the way in which we see things and the way we can express things.
Do you want to take us through a few more images of the winter wall so we can see the whole structure there?
Exactly. So Alex described it to you incredibly well. It's about a 4-meter diameter circular wall, very simple structure, which you can see here, just up above the shore. So I was using all the beach stones to create it. And this is a view of it from the boat. So you also, something that's really nice if you ever approach this wall, which you can see, in fact, the thing that you notice from the water more is the shadow. So it's another form of drawing, is the actual shadow of the space of the entrance, more than the wall itself. The wall sort of brilliantly melts back into the landscape, which I feel very happy about, so it doesn't sort of stick out too much. But what you do notice is this very sharp sort of darkness hovering, which is a really nice detail, I think. And the same, in a way, that illustrates it really well here. This is in a very remote landscape where I've been also making other work, which we'll come to. And then this is the very exquisite moment when the sun is setting. And again, I mean, in a way, this, as you can see, it's so painterly in its qualities. So for me, this is as much a drawing as a film work, as a work in itself, if you're witnessing it right there. But it feels like something about these works when they're channeling light. It feels like you can hold the light almost. And my first instinct when I look at an image like that is just how painterly the color is. It's got that luminosity that I would really look for in painting or drawing. And a very wonderful thing that took me by surprise, which is, it's sort of amazing that I didn't think it through, but when the sun was setting, of course, the light disappearing ascends rather than descends. But in your mind, in your physical body, you're so thinking about descending that it was such a surprise when the light was disappearing up the way. It was a wonderful experience. So You can.
When you show us divided block, and I want to ask something that links
Yes,
both.
yes, of course. So this is taking us on to the one of the works I made in Namibia, channeling light, a little bit ahead of creating Winter Wall. And this is another example of drawing. Your notebooks are so precious to you, and your drawing books, and they are a space that you feel anything should happen in them. They're your own space. They're your way of thinking through drawing, thinking through your thoughts. Writing's important, but actually drawing can say so much or express so much of our thought processes and unlock things. So I encourage you hugely. I'm sure you're all using drawing books a lot, but I really encourage you to use drawing books of any sort. And in this case, it's just actually my written notebook, but I was just quickly doing the proportions of divided block. Sorry. And this is the work that Alexandra was referring to. This is that was referring to the notebook drawing. This is taking the midday sun, so charting a very sharp, bright light. And if I just go back for a moment, the work sitting just above on the next platform up on the quarry, it's in a marble quarry in Namibia. That divided wall was charting the rising light, the morning light. But again, you can see that this beam of light could equally be termed as a drawing. In terms of drawing with light, it's got that sort of tangibility that we desire in our drawings.
So if we're thinking here about light itself as your pencil, it strikes me that these are two very different pencils, because one is in northern Scotland and is made for February,
Yes.
and one is in Namibia, and it must be such blazing sharp light that you can rely upon, for one thing.
Yes.
And I wonder how the structures that you make to channel that light are made according to those differences that you're so aware of in the quality of light in those different places.
Well, that's a beautiful question. I mean, I think, just going back to the structures were inspired by partly by the desire for creating a passage of light, but also that notion of, in the quarry, you had these beautiful cut spaces, literally perpendicular. So in a sense, I was responding to the sharpness of what was already there. And I wanted to, in a sense, echo that with the precision of the block. And I also really like the idea of returning the material to a void. So it's almost like, but I wanted to, around each of these works is a sort of human width, just a little bit wider than our shoulder, so that you can walk all the way around. You can feel contained between the quarry wall and the built work. And so that's also, there's a physical dimension to our own bodily experience of the work, where you are sort of being invited to rethink about the relationship between the cut wall and the built wall, as it were. But even though the primary element to these works was the channeling of the light, I was very much thinking about how one would walk around them and experience them and enjoy them. So I think the precision comes from all these fantastically, sharp carved edges that the quarry is very dynamic with. And I love the relationship between, I mean, this is almost like a sort of conversation of a drawing in itself, just this image, because you've got the beautiful natural line of the mountain still above the image. But you've then got these very sharp cut walls. So it's a sort of fantastic juxtaposition in drawing between something very sharply drawn and something that's got a sort of more organic quality to it.
Yeah.
And with Winter Wall, just thinking about that, if I just quickly go back, I'm wanting something that will actually sit, in a sense, I'm in a wild landscape here, so I want something that will just sit more, will disappear into the landscape a bit more. So and also I needed something here that was self-standing, and the simplest form that you can do that with is a circular wall. So that's
In the drawings, in the sketchbook drawings,
yes.
you're obviously needing to do almost architectural drawings of the shapes that you're going to build, but are you also then drawing in order to imagine the way that the light will fall at a time when you're not going to be there in the quarry? Because this is what amazes me, is that you have to make these structures without actually seeing the light fall,
Yes.
because that could be at a different time of year and you're going to have to go back to Namibia
Yes,
to see it.
yeah, no. In Namibia, actually, I was working with the light that I was experiencing at the time. It was in June, I think, in their winter. Not that it's very wintry, but sometimes I'm having to make a very educated guess, like with the winter wall, and then discover whether it works or not. In this case, I was actually watching. So one of the things that happens a lot, as you can imagine, is there's a very large amount of drawing that goes on the marble floor before I begin building.
Yeah.
And I
Also,
realized,
the marble is your paper.
yes, completely. Obviously, it's been, rubbed out away through us creating the wall itself, but I had local help from Himba men and women when I was making this work. But for a couple of days, I'll set up a number of verticals and watch the way in which the sun is moving in relation to the quarry space, so I understand how to sort of orientate the work. And that's actually what I'm doing in Carrara as well. I spent a couple of days in this huge quarry in Carrara, and then I had to, in Carrara's case, I do have to guess, because the September sun is coming in at too much of a slant to be able to channel it. So I'm reckoning it's going to be late spring and then late summer that this new work I'm making works.
There were some questions about details of size and location.
Yes.
I mean, we can certainly say that that divided block work is in a Namibian quarry.
Yeah.
Yeah, and all of the images were on Julie's website with dimensions and locations, and it's such a helpful website for people to use as an archive. But Julie, we only have 10 minutes or so to go, so I think
yes.
we must definitely take in the extraordinary curve of a riverbank. Now,
Yes.
let's just for a moment just pause to say these are such strenuously made works. I mean, I associate drawing with a flick of the hand, but this is actually moving the landscape around. How did you make this, Julie?
So this I just cut with a spade. I saw that there was a natural curve in the landscape. So when I'm working in this sort of way, I tend to let the landscape suggest things to me. And I have been working with a series of riverbanks, and I'm going to skip to another one very quickly. And this one very much had this beautiful sort of natural curve. So I just cut it much more sharply with a spade and distributed the soil, which is the darker soil you can see, and then had this amazing shadow. So this is just drawing with shadow now as well, where it just had in some of the angles, it just had an incredibly dynamic, again, like a fantastically dynamic brush mark, like a calligraphic brush mark. So for me, that's when the image suddenly has a sort of life of its own that I will have seen down the camera and thought, oh, okay, this has got to, I think probably in this case, because it's got this beautiful thickness at the beginning and then just sweeps down to a tail end, like you get in using a big brush.
This whole notion of art made from from shadow. I mean, it takes us to the gnomon thrown from throwing its shadow on a sundial, but also, the origins of portraiture, the throwing of a shadow. So
Yeah.
though what you're doing seems so far from, conventional painting, actually shadow work is deep in the tradition of art,
Yeah,
isn't it?
yeah, that's a really, and and you think in photography as well. I think I have never really thought to connect that, but of course it is. And the use of light, the importance in the portrait is incredibly, the way
Mm,
light falls. In this work, actually, the shadow goes almost beyond what I was showing you, where I think the curved riverbank is a sort of drawing. I think here it becomes a sort of spatial void. But I wanted to show just a clip. I think we've got time, and we can speak over this. This is making the piece that was shown you. But all of these images are, for me, like elements of drawing. The dust, the earth falling, in this case, the notion of sound. How can you draw with sound? So I think I have a very suddenly got a life of its own. So if we go now, because we should
Can
go.
I suggest that we skip ahead to perhaps the
Yes,
throne drawing, so that we get that idea of gesture
yes, yes,
would be
yeah.
really nice.
So very quickly, this work, the suspended block, created a huge amount of material I had to throw away. And I was observing the way in which the earth was flying up through the air behind myself and the guide. The reason it started moving. Sorry. And I thought it was so like a brush mark that for some reason it started to move on its own accord. So I don't know quite what's happened there. Okay.
Just tell us about the earth in Namibia, and hopefully the
Yes.
computer will
So
sort it
the
out.
so the earth in Namibia, it's in an area where the Himba women who still wear red pigment on their skin. The earth is very, very red with iron oxide. So this was in a riverbank very near to Ochive, where I collect this pigment with the Himba women who use it. And it's this incredibly rich color. And I was observing the way in which we were throwing these spade loads of this red earth in the air, and it was just they were like these beautiful brush marks in 3 dimension, going through the sky. So I took a series of images of them being thrown, and some of them have such a strong sort of evocation of what I would look for in a drawing, both in terms of volume and form, but also that sense of playfulness and color and tone and structure. And again, I got very excited, as you can see from the throne drawing. So I started pouring drawings as well. And again, with the playing with the lights, and just from showing you that film clip, that notion of dust and a very deliberate gesture where you can see I've poured the earth, to the gestures I'm not controlling, but still have this very strong element of drawing in them.
Mm. And part of your reason for going to meet the Himba people was
Yes.
to learn from them about the way they use the pigment, they use this material of the earth, and this sense of collaboration with people who live with the earth is really central for what you do, I think. And yet you have to go off by yourself and make something that's totally independent and true to you. How can you say a little bit about how that works?
Well, I think I feel such a profound respect for people who live very close to the ground, and live. I mean, the Himba are still nomadic; they're still in tradition. The Himba that I was living and working with, and their knowledge of the land and the landscape, and indeed husbanding their animals, and the way in which they move around the landscape, to different watering holes and different grazing grounds. That knowledge is so precious, and I think it's that sort of knowledge that we can draw from in our drawing. But we, you know, we are losing that knowledge. So to be alongside people who have that knowledge is a huge privilege, and I feel their connectivity with the landscape is what I'm aspiring to when I'm making the work. And I certainly don't have what their experience of it, but by being with them, it's sort of, in a sense, learning something of that connection. And then also just by doing the work and trying out things. I think what I observed in the Himba women is that there's something so free spirited about them, and it's like a very strong encouragement to just try things. Don't, you know, what I would say is, if you think of something, just do it. It doesn't matter if it doesn't work, because then that thing that didn't work will help you find something that does work. And it's that energy that creates really interesting drawing, whether you like it or not that feeling of, oh, I'd like to make a good drawing now and I'm really trying and it doesn't work. No, it doesn't work. That's the difficulty and beauty of drawing, is that it requires a certain sort of lightness of touch and experimentation and a very sincere concentration. So it's a sort of wonderful marriage of things.
Wonderful. Julie, we don't have time to explain all the fire stacks, but can I suggest that as a kind of finale image,
yes,
you take us forward to perhaps just a single last image of drawing with fire, because I think having seen these images so far, no one's going to doubt that you will draw with fire.
Yes.
Okay. If you just
we'll
one of the last fire stacks.
Yes, okay. I'm so sorry to be skipping. Okay, so here is what a fire stack looks like, for those of you who might not know, which is a tidal work, and I create a pillar of stone, the same method that you've been seeing, and then light a fire on it, and which I have to continually stoke while there is an incoming tide coming in. So the battle between the elements. And these drawings are self-explanatory, but let's linger with this one for a moment. So what's amazing is that they are drawing with the sea. I mean, they're doing many things, but one of the, keeping with the very pure discussion of drawing, when I first discovered these in Jura in the 90s, and then I've come back to them in the last 10 years, they have this dazzling quality of showing you so many different aspects of the elements, whether it's the wind through the smoke. And in this particular image, this is very near to extinguishment, a very incremental extinguishment. And here is in the winter, I just have done a recent winter firing in February. And, you know, this is just all pure drawing on one level. It's like drawing in motion, and how you can then translate something of this energy into a work on paper would be, you know, it doesn't need to be a literal translation of that, but something of the energy of these images, how you can sort of use the painterliness that we were talking about with the winter wall, and how you can then express that on paper or with different materials that you collect.
Julie, what is a metaphor really to me, who's more used to thinking about drawing on paper, it's a metaphor that allows me a whole new way of seeing the way light falls on sea, which forever now I will imagine in terms of calligraphic strokes. It really opens things up. So I think we must open up now, and thank you so much so far. And I think people have lots of questions.
Right, I'm going to stop sharing.
Thank you so much, both of you. What a absolutely mesmerizing, expansive conversation. Absolutely wonderful. Thank you.
Oh, well, it's a wonderful topic to discuss.
I mean, so much food for thought. Lots of questions, and I just wondered, kind of sort of starting us off, you know, so much. It struck me that sort of the presence of the body in your work is so important. Whether it's the gesture, the strenuousness that Alex was talking about. And I loved your phrase, I think was when we were discussing things earlier, drawing is breathing. So I just was thinking about, you know, the ways that you're leaving a trace of yourself in the landscape, but also, is the landscape not leaving its traces, its marks, its pigments on you when you know, walk away covered in the dust of the quarry, or the pigments, you know, it's staining you? Is it drawing on you in some way? And how does that sort of affect your connection to a particular place?
Well, I think that whether, I mean, I certainly get covered in the materials. I haven't really thought about it being drawing on me. I guess you could, the truth is you could explore that. I haven't chosen to explore that, but someone else who might be listening to this, you know, if you, that might become really important to you, how in which, you know, the material impacts on you and your body, and how you might use that. So I think it's a brilliant point, Claudia. In my case, I think very like, you know, I've done a lot of teaching of drawing as well. If we sit and draw in the landscape, that's different from just going for a walk in the landscape. I mean, going for a walk is always nutritious, but if you then choose to sit for half an hour and look, you will remember more from having sat and observed and drawn. And in the same way, the physical engagement allows you an intimacy with that place. So those places I worked in Libya, even with those very light touch drawings, I have such a body memory of, because I physically engage. So one of the things I really encourage you with drawing is that it really allows you to connect with yourself, whether it's in your drawing book or with what you're observing, or if you're just experimenting with materials. That period of time that you're experimenting with materials, let's say it was in a woodland close to where you live, or you will start creating a relationship with that place that you didn't have by not physically interacting. So I think when we physically, it's why, you know, Alex observed it beautifully, but it's why when I see the Himba women, I think, gosh, they're so connected with the ground. It's just because they are, you know, and because they're there and they're living, you know, the land is what informs their living, as it were. And I think drawing that's how we should approach drawing, because then you become very immersed in it, and you're not then overthinking, because drawing, if it's overthinking, loses something of the spirit of that. You know, you all know when you've done a really good drawing, it just breathes, it's full of life. You can't explain it, but there's a vitality there that's just so invigorating, and that doesn't come from trying too hard. It just comes from really living the process of the drawing. I hope that sort of answers it.
What a beautiful answer. Thank you. Thank you. I'm just sort of, there's so many questions coming through, and I can see that quite a few sort of lead back to this question of scale. I'm just sort of going to combine a couple, but a question around how much importance the horizon and perspective have in your work.
I think it's always there. But when I mean, let's use the desert drawings. In the desert drawings, it was fundamental, but I don't think it was necessarily always what informed the drawing. But for instance, how I could answer that really accurately is when I first arrived in the desert, I was so bowled over by it, and I felt I could only work with the simplest possible forms. And I'm sure that was connected to these enormous horizons, I have no doubt. And it wasn't necessarily that I made that conscious connection, but I'm sure that that's what was happening. And then what will have happened is, over time, as the work evolved, the horizons or the context would have, of course, been influential on scale. I mean, scale is a very interesting one. So partly scale is going to be practical, what you can manage within the time frame you have, and also what feels right, you know, in terms of our scale, human scale, in relation to a landscape, because a landscape's so huge. And that, I think, you have to use your intuition on, because any one of you who's listening, you will have a different interpretation of scale to what I would, to what Alex would, to what you would, Claudia. So scale is about a really good instinct for feeling your way. And sometimes if you don't quite get the scale or the sighting right, you'll know something will speak to you about that, where you maybe you need to enlarge it a little bit, and you'll just sort of somehow follow that instinct. And horizon, or the relationship to other elements within the landscape, I think again it will be a very intuitive understanding, and that might even become clearer when you start framing it within a camera or when you start drawing it. So it's all these balances between sort of intuitive and then responding to that and thinking it through and thinking, okay, I can reorientate, if that answers.
Yeah, absolutely, and kind of goes back to some of your discussion around sort of the relationship between the page and the landscape and the sort of limitlessness, and where does a drawing begin and end.
Yes,
that's really fascinating.
And I think like time, scale is wonderfully elastic. Time is such an elusive thing between, a day can go very fast, but sometimes a day can feel very full and like it hasn't just run away with itself. And the same way with scale, you can create something that's not enormous, but in a certain context, it can seem really enigmatic what the scale might be. And I think that's really fascinating.
Absolutely. Going back to a few more audience questions, there's a question about your desire to, is your desire to create a passage of light related to an impetus to create, to capture a quality of the numinous or transcendent?
Of the newness.
The numinous, sorry.
Numinous.
Yeah, the numinous.
I suppose, if you don't mind, I'll answer it in a slightly different way. The desire for channeling light is, I feel, and particularly in Scotland, it's very elusive. The sun, light and moonlight, light is it's an extraordinary thing. Without sunlight, we couldn't exist. So I think it's very, very fundamental to our existence. And we forget to look, we forget to honor and appreciate. And I think this desire, I began work as a painter, so I have a very strong sort of painterly instinct, and I still paint. I think the desire for channeling light is that, or creating a structure around channeling light, is this notion of a work both being, there's a very strong physical engagement, but actually the light itself is so exquisite. And when we channel it in some way, we see it afresh, we appreciate it afresh. Rising light, seeing it channeled through a line is just a very, very spine-tingling quality it has, because it reminds you all over again how extraordinary it is that the sun rises every morning. And if it didn't, we wouldn't be around. But because the sun rises every morning, we forget. And so it's something about reconnecting with these very sort of fundamental aspects to our lives. But I don't think like that when I'm doing it, if that makes sense. And I don't think it's, in terms of using that word numinous, I don't think like that, but I think I'm very aware of the transience, and I'm aware that in any case, whatever you make, if you channel light, it's only going to last for a certain time in the year because of the way in which bigger thing, the way in which the earth and the sun move. And I don't think you need, you can either know all the science of that or not. I don't think it matters either way, because it's such a phenomenon in itself. But I think I am also very interested in the relationship between the solidity of a work, or you could say the concreteness of a drawing, in relation to its very delicate ephemerality when it's in the process of flux and change.
Thank you. Yes, and I think ethereal was the word that Alex used at one point, which felt really right. And perhaps that connects on to a comment again from one of our audience who's talked about the sense of impermanence, loving the impermanence of your work, and that there are similarities with music. I was just thinking when we were playing around with the film piece earlier, you know, just the importance of sound in your work, and there was this sort of rhythmic quality that we were picking up on, but also when playing it without the sound, we were really invited to kind of give such a sort of honed attention to the textures and those qualities. So different senses were being sort of invited to participate. So I don't know if that's something that you're really thinking about deeply when you're preparing for your.
Yes, hugely. I mean, the films, with the films, I want you to feel involved in them. I want you to be, you know, the more they can invite you into the material, the better. And it's always a process of experimentation and discovery, but for instance, if you hear the cutting of the sand, like in the riverbank work, then you're beginning to get a bodily feel of what that material is. And then if you start seeing it sort of thrown up in the air or being in some way cut or falling, and you're hearing it falling, you're already, without you knowing it, your knowledge of that material is growing. So, and therefore, and the sound is in a sense enhancing that, the rhythm of the sound. So in the case of the Namibian films, I was using rhythm a lot of the process, in a sense, to invite the viewer into a more visceral relationship with what they were experiencing. But meanwhile, actually it being sort of almost like a transformational drawing that's occurring moment by moment, by you know, creating a frame that's no longer contextual, but just literally of the material itself.
Thank you. Well, there are so many more questions, so we'll have to have another conversation a little further down the line, but I'm afraid we have to bring things to a close for this evening. And I just want to thank you both again for such an inspiring conversation to sort of set us on our way for the series. And just to echo someone in our audience has written that thanking you for encouraging us to experiment and use our intuition. So just like to echo that thought too. Thank you both so much, to Julie Brook and Alex Harris. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you very much, Claudia. Thank you, Alex. Wonderful questions as always.
Thank you both.